Okay, it's a big merit to be here. Thank the rabbis for letting me come, Rabbi Schudrich and Rabbi Ellis. Just a little bit of a background for the people that don't know me. I grew up in New Jersey, and I grew up completely secular. I didn't know what Shabbat or Tefillin was till I was about 25 years old. Went to Eretz Yisrael for the first time, felt like I was home, even though I'd never been there. A week before I left Israel, I met my future wife, who was a religious Yemenite Israeli. And we started to date long distance, and then she realized I wasn't just secular, I was also an atheist. So she told me to go visit different Orthodox rabbis and tell them all my deep philosophical questions that I had, because she didn't have the answers for them. She had Emunah Peshuta, very simple faith. And I did. I was starting graduate school at UCLA for social work and for clinical psychology, mental health. I ended up becoming a mental health therapist and a substance abuse counselor, clinician. And after about a year of hanging out with Orthodox rabbis, one of them gave me a book. It was called The Secret Life of God by Rabbi David Aaron. He has a yeshiva next to the Kotel in Eretz Yisrael. And I had an epiphany that Hashem existed. And the reason that I am the way I am is because I'm Jewish. I couldn't sleep all night. And from that moment moving forward, I started my journey of teshuvah. Soon after, I decided that why did I go into the mental health field? Because I want to help bring peace to as many people as possible, including myself, because every therapist needs a therapist. And the main reason usually why people become mental health clinicians is because they themselves have received a lot of help or need a lot of help, and therefore they develop an empathy or a compassion for others who are struggling. But in my late 20s, because of my newfound interest in Judaism, and because my goal wasn't necessarily therapy or psychology, my goal was to try and really help people and create peace. So what's the best way to do that? The Torah says that the Torah is the key to peace. The truth is the key to peace. All truth leads to peace. So I decided that I should go learn. So in my late 20s, I started working as a mashgiach. It's a supervisor in a kosher restaurant, a sushi place at night. One of the students here, his co-boss, hired me. And then I worked there late at nights as the mashgiach. And during the day, I learned Aleph Bet at the yeshiva. A couple of years after that, they added me to the kollel. And then I got smicha. And then my rabbi passed away during COVID. Yeah. So it's been a wild journey. Obviously, there's a lot in between there. But that's a little bit of the background on me. Afterwards, I became very connected to the teachings of Chassidut, and specifically Rabbi Nachman. So one of the reasons why I'm in Poland right now is because B'ezras Hashem in a week, I'm going to be in Uman for Rosh Hashanah. To me, Rabbi Nachman's teachings, even though obviously in the Jewish world, a lot of his students and a lot of his teachings are stigmatized. If you get to the real thing and you can get behind or get past the dancing on the cars and things like this, you're going to find some very, very, very deep psychological insights that even today's therapists and psychologists don't yet realize or know. The Baal Shem Tov also had tremendous insights, even in, let's say, trauma. Just as an example, the leading form of trauma therapy is called EMDR. And you move your eyes from left to right as you speak out your trauma. And somehow, when you move your eyes from left to right, the trauma becomes resolved for you. That's the therapy term for it's not painful anymore, and you're able to live your life not always feeling like you're stuck. And the way you do it is simply by moving your eyes left to right, as you say to the therapist. So it's an unbelievable, like, how did you even come onto this? The Baal Shem Tov, over 200 years ago, actually created EMDR. And he said that if you talk about things that you're struggling with, or you're dealing with anger, or you're some type of emotional turbulence, and you just move your eyes from right to left, he says that you're going to start to feel relief. How did the Baal Shem Tov know that? Because in Kabbalah, it's taught that spiritually there's a right side and the left side. The right side represents Hashem revealing himself to you. That's the side of spirituality. The left side represents concealment of Hashem in our lives. So as you talk about what's going on with you and you move your eyes from right to left, what you're really doing is you're creating a unity in your mind between the events that took place in your life and the fact that Hashem really was there. Does that make sense? Yeah. Which is an amazing thing. Which goes to show that it's not the events themselves that are causing the suffering. It's the feeling like there was no purpose or there was no good that comes from it. But once you feel that Hashem is the cause of it and it brought you to a certain place in your life, that's what heals it. So this is all from the Baal Shem Tov. And then obviously I feel that Rabbi Nachman, he took it to a whole nother level. If you look at Likutei Moharan, it's really a book of tremendous psychology insight. And one of the reasons why I feel so compelled about it, and I ended up making an organization teaching these teachings, is because they helped me to heal. That even though I'd seen therapists since I've been 10 years old for depression and for anxiety, and they ended up diagnosing me with other things, which may or may not have stuck, it was really only the teachings of Rabbi Nachman that actually helped me. And this is what I want to speak about, because I was just talking to somebody yesterday, my best friend. You know, I grew up secular, like I said. He still is. He lives in Israel just by chance. And we had a conversation about COVID and the epidemic and what's going on. So he was saying, you know, how could you go to Europe now during the COVID? It's obviously, this is a very touchy topic. But I told him that in the secular world, and we don't even realize this, your main education is coming from the news. As a religious Jew, every day you're reading books from spiritual masters and experts in Torah. And that's the main form of education. You might also watch the news, but it's ancillary, it's secondary, it's tofel to what you're learning. You try to see how it fits in with, so you're continually in education. But in the secular world, after school ends, a lot of people stop becoming educated. So where are they getting their education from? The news. But the news has many reasons for showing what they show. Just as an example of this, you know, there's genocides in countries. And that is just as big of a deal as COVID. It's also man-produced. So in some ways, it's even harder to fathom how that happens. And even beyond that, there is a mental health epidemic, that depression rates have never been higher, anxiety has never been higher, substance abuse, addiction, suicide, suicidal ideation, all of these things have skyrocketed. Fear has skyrocketed, anger, all of these things. I said that COVID is not the only epidemic. There's many epidemics. And just because the news is only focusing on one, doesn't mean that we have to only focus on healing that one. Because in fact, Rabbi Nachman says, and it fits in very well with modern physiology, where does all illness come from? It comes from a lack of joy. What did they teach me in social work school? The majority of illness comes from stress, right? Now, a person knows that when he's not happy, he feels stressed. When a person's happy, he can be doing a million things. He can have tremendous amount of obligations, maybe more so than when he's not happy, but he doesn't feel stressed. He feels like he's able to carry the whole thing. So we see that, in fact, stress comes from a lack of joy. So if we can maintain a state of happiness, we can reduce the rates of illness. In fact, there's a very interesting Tosefta in the Gemara. The Gemara speaks about if there is an illness that sweeps over where you live, there's a pandemic, you should leave the city. So the obvious question is, like, you need the Gemara to teach you that. Obviously, if you see that there's a virus taking over and you don't want to die, so you should leave. So there's a very interesting explanation, I think, from the Maharsha. He says the reason you should leave the city is not because you're going to get it. The reason you should leave the city is because the fear of the virus itself or the illness itself is going to cause you to get sick. It's very, very fascinating. Okay. So I want to focus on all the epidemics, even the ones that the news does not speak about. Rabbi Nachman said in the final generation, everyone's going to need me. Now, either he's a He is a tremendous egotist, and he thinks that his teachings are just better than everybody else's. And for some reason, even though he lives in a little shtetl in Ukraine, at the end of time, we're all going to need his teachings. Or maybe he knew something. Maybe he saw, like he said, that there's a flood coming into the world. What's the flood that's coming into the world? It's not going to be a lack of food. It's not going to be a lack of drink. It's going to be a flood of atheism. And after he passed away in 1810, atheism spread out all over the world. Where does that come from? So it says in the Torah, Hashem is speaking to Moshe Rabbeinu, speaks to the Jewish people, says, Bayomahu, on that day, I'm going to hide my face. I'm going to hide my face. Rabbi Nachman has a very famous Torah, a very famous lesson, which is very deep. And he says that the reason we're all going to suffer at the end so much is not simply because Hashem is hiding his face from us, but he's going to be so hidden that we don't even know that he's there to hide his face. He said, when Hashem hides his face from you, so it's painful. That causes a struggle, that causes suffering. If you know that he exists, you know that he created the world, you know that he creates all the events in your life, you see he's not listening to you when you pray to him, so that's very painful. But what about a person who they're suffering from emotional distress, psychological distress, divorce, mental health issues, substance abuse, the children are not listening at all and they go in completely dangerous paths. So what's the reason that that's happening for them? Because Hashem's hiding from them. But the majority of people do not think that Hashem's hiding from them. They don't even know Hashem exists. Because that is what he called the chastara shebetoch chastar. That in the final generation, there's going to be a concealment within a concealment. The concealment is going to be so deep that the person himself won't even know the cause of his suffering. So that is very scary. That is very painful. What I want to teach is that in a very incredible way, Rabbi Nachman shows how this situation itself can transform into the greatest light. That this double concealment, which is the greatest darkness that has been known to man, even though it's not a wartime like it was even in the Shoah, it's not a time of famine like it was 100 years ago, or things that were apocalyptic for thousands of years. We live in a relatively stable time besides of COVID, besides the virus that's going around. So why are we suffering so much? Why is it that our great-grandparents were so much happier than us and they had so much less than us? So the real reason is because Hashem is hiding really, really, really intensely. Tremendous darkness, tremendous darkness. But one of the biggest yesods of the Torah is that every single thing that Hashem does for you is for the very best. So if Hashem is hiding himself from you, doubly over, what's the reason for that? And he says in the Torah, it's mafurish, it's explicit. He says, because on the day that you're suffering so much, you're going to start to search for me. You're going to start to look for me. How many Bali Tshuva do we have now in this generation? It's the most that we ever had. And it keeps increasing more and more and more. Because in a way that's very hard for us to fathom, it's actually the darkness in our life that pushes us towards the light. That this is Hashem's way. Either you can find the light, you can choose the light, or the darkness itself compels you to look for it, to search for it. Now, Rabbi Nachman, where is the source for this? That the darkness itself can contribute to the light and make it even greater. So we know that there's something called ketoret. Ketoret is something that Sephardim, they say often, they even have a cloth, a homemade cloth, because it's so important for them, because based on Kabbalah, the ketoret is very big. What's the ketoret? It was 11 spices that they used in the Beit HaMikdash. It was supposed to nullify decrees. In fact, my wife's sister, she lives in a more religious area, when anything is going on in the community, somebody gets sick, doesn't know where their child is, whatever, they all come together privately into a room, like a minyan of 10 guys, and they say ketoret. The interesting thing about ketoret is that 10 of the spices smell amazing. The 10 best smelling spices you could ever imagine. One of them smells horrible. Not just bad, horrible. Okay. The fascinating part, though, is that that very foul smelling spice makes the 10 spices smell better when it's all together. So in some ways, if you can drag the darkness of your life into light, if you could take the sadness of your life and bring it into joy, then it actually increases the joy, more so than if you never had the sadness. Rabbi Nachman says that if you see a person, you're in a circle dance, the Hasidim, they like to dance. So you're in a circle dance and you see one guy, he's shy, or he's just not interested. He doesn't want to be involved. This is not how he grew up. He's not interested in dancing right now. He says something which is not very liberal. He says you should go pick him up and force him into the circle, and then you should start dancing with you. I've seen it with my own eyes, by the way. And it was very interesting because he said what's going to happen is his darkness that he's dealing with, it's not only going to go away when he's amidst the circle. He's going to increase the joy of the people in the circle itself. Because he said that there's two levels of joy. There's natural joy that you feel when things are just going well. And there's a higher level of joy that when you're suffering itself turns into joy. Or like Rabbi Nachman famously said, there's a way that all the meniyot in your life can turn into ni'imot. That all of the obstacles in your life can turn into the most pleasant sweetness, bliss, ecstasy. That this is Hashem's greatness. That the darkness turns to light. Do we see any example of this in the Torah where we're like on a more global level? This is obvious. So there's a very famous midrash that when the Jewish people were going into the land of Israel, there's a Jewish law. There was one illness that they speak about in the Torah. There's only one illness in the Torah. What's the reason there's only one illness in the Torah? There's many illnesses, but all of reality is pouring out of the Torah itself. That means that every illness, whether it's COVID or whether it's depression or whether it's some other type of virus or whether it's tuberculosis, polio, all of these different illnesses have to be branching out from this one illness in the Torah, which is called tza'arat. It's a skin disease. There's an interesting Jewish law that if this skin disease gets on your home and you see signs of it in the house, you have to destroy the whole home. You have to destroy the whole home. Now, on paper, that's a big loss. Why can't I just get rid of the block? Why do I have to get rid of the whole home? And how is that really beneficial to us anyway? However, when the Jewish people were coming into Israel and they had to conquer these different places, one of the nations there got very afraid because they saw how much success the Jewish people were having in war. So what ended up happening, they said, we're going to take all of the money that we had because they were very wealthy, and they put all their gold into their home. And they said, we're going to leave our homes. When the Jewish people come here, even if they take our homes, they get us out of here, they're not going to know the gold is in the home. And then we'll eventually be able to come back and take it. However, what ended up happening, they got tza'arat, they got this skin disease when they got to Israel. The skin disease got in the homes. They had to break down the home. And once they broke down the home, they found the wealth and the gold. Okay. So what's the depth of this? What's the beauty of this? Many times we get sick. Many times we're suffering. But it's the suffering itself that forces us to break down, which is very painful, to lose ourselves in confusion and pain. And somehow through that experience, if we're able to approach it in a certain way, we can actually draw gold from that place. Gold that you didn't know that you had. Strength inside of you that you didn't know existed. Resources that you're able to pull now that you didn't have to before the suffering, before the struggle. And in a really weird, very tremendously beautiful way, the illness itself contributes to your healing. And this is the greatness of Hashem. This is the love of Hashem. Rabbi Nachman, he wrote stories. Many people have heard of the Lost Princess, but he wrote 13 stories. Why did he start writing these stories? Rabbi Nachman said, you're not listening to the Torah that I'm teaching, so I'm going to have to start telling you stories. So on paper, why are stories any better than Torah? Why should they listen anymore? However, Rabbi Nachman famously said, he had a lot of epithets, which is good for our generation that we have the hashtag one-liners. That's all we can really focus on. So Rabbi Nachman said, people tell stories to put others to sleep, but I tell stories to wake them up. People say that stories put you to sleep, but I say stories wake you up. One of the stories that he's told is about a boy. He was a very special boy. And they had trouble having kids. And when this boy was born, they went to a big tzaddik. He prayed for them. And the boy was born, and supposedly he was born with jewels, stones, riches inside of him. However, when he came out, they didn't see anything unique about him at all. However, he gained a lot of attention because he had some type of pain, he had some type of grace. The people around him connected to him a lot. His older sister got very jealous. So what did she do? She went to a magician, and she asked that the magician should curse her brother so that he should get hurt. Something should happen to him so people stop paying attention to him. What ended up happening is he's by a tree and he cuts his hand very bad. After he cut his hand, though, he saw that there were stones inside. Beautiful stones. And the thing that she was scared of, the thing that she was trying to prevent from coming out, which was his uniqueness, which was his greatness, through her trying to destroy him, it actually led to that greatness coming out. And this is the connection between the illnesses that we're struggling with, the sadness, the anger, the fear, COVID, all of these things that Hashem is hiding his face from us. But in fact, this is going to contribute to the Geula itself. This is going to create the redemption itself. How is that possible? Because there's one thing that you need when you can't find Hashem. There's one thing that you need when you don't know that things are good. And that's called belief. That's called emunah. That's called faith. Faith begins where knowledge ends. And if our knowledge of Hashem is in complete concealment, it was destroyed with the Beit HaMikdash, and it continues to go into more and more and more exile. So even though we're further and further away from Har Sinai, that means that our da'at, our knowledge, is going more and more into exile. But the Vilna Gaon says something amazing. It says the closer you get to Mashiach, though, the light of Mashiach is shining then. The light of the Torah might be going into exile. The light of knowledge of God is going into exile. But the light of Emunah is growing stronger and stronger. And in the final generation before the coming of the Mashiach, that light of Emunah is going to be the brightest. And so we see that, in fact, what looks like the Shoah of spirituality is actually the breeding ground for Emunah to spread up all over the world. Because there is no answer for our ills, for our challenges, for the pandemics that are sweeping over the world, which are not just COVID, but are in every area and every faculty of the human experience, beside emunah, beside faith, and not just stam faith, not basic faith. It's not enough. You're going to have to come up with some very, very strong grade A Chalav Yisrael faith, because that's the only way we're able to get through 2021. It's too much pain, too much confusion, too much suffering, too much not knowing. You need Emunah. Rabbi Nachman's great-grandfather said that every single yerida in a person's life, every descent in their life is for the sake of one thing, Aliyah. For Aliyah. Where do we see that this is a fact? Where do we see this phenomenon is so incredibly true? It happens on a global level, that the greatest yerida leads to the biggest Aliyah. We're in Poland right now. My grandfather was the lone survivor from his family. He came into the camps at 13 years old. He left at 18. He was in Bergen-Belsen and Auschwitz. His father was killed. His mother was killed. His siblings were killed. The only one who survived. Every day was a miracle that he got out of there. And it's a tremendous, it's very surreal that his grandson now is teaching here. It's amazing. It's really amazing. But what happened there? Adolf Hitler comes to power. He says that religion, Judaism, morality is the cause of all suffering in the world. And if we could just allow ourselves to be animals like we really are, we'll finally achieve peace, because we don't have this pretend wall that we're creating for ourselves that's disconnecting all of us. We can just be our true monkey selves, and then we'll be happy. And he said, and what's the cause of that? The issue comes from the Jewish people, because they're the ones who created this false reality. It's called morality. that we should care for one another, that we shouldn't kill each other, that we shouldn't steal from each other. Who said? It's made up. So we tried to exterminate the Jewish people. You don't have a greater Yerida than the Shoah, than the Holocaust, where 6 million Jews were killed. And yet, what was the result of that? Aliyah. The Jewish people went to the land of Israel. That the dream of extermination led to the dream of our forefathers. And you could never imagine that. You could never fathom that. How the worst episode in modern history led to the greatest revelation of godliness, the greatest spreading out of spirituality. And now people are going more and more and more. Ever since COVID started, I remember when I called up and I was thinking about making Aliyah, and I told them I want to go this month. They said, okay, you can go then, but just so you know, when you get on the plane, there's going to be a lot of people with you. I said, why do you think so many people are going? They said, Hashem has a very weird sense of humor. You know, COVID is causing everybody to think about what's important in their lives. A lot of people want to go. They said, I'm looking for something to happen or sign. And then their job falls apart or something's happening. They're not able to make money. And what's the point of living in Western society now? There's nothing else there. So they come to Israel. Rabbi Nachman goes further. And he says, to the degree to which you suffer or you lack some koach, some ability in your life, to that degree, you have the potential for the opposite. For example, if I struggle tremendously with lack of self-confidence, okay? Now you think nebach me, and you get a lot of therapy, and you get a lot of self-help books, and you practice it, and you work on it, and you speak nicely to yourself, but you always think it's going to be a problem for you. Never think you're going to be able to get out. Rabbi Nachman says, not only are you going to be able to get out, but the fact that you suffer and you struggle from lack of self-confidence, it means that in potential, you have the ability to be very, very confident. More confident, Rabbi Nachman says, than a person who's naturally confident. This is one of the keys to me getting out of my depression. Because my whole life, depression is genetic. I saw my grandparents had it. I saw that I kept getting it every single year. So this is always going to be my problem. I'm never going to overcome this. So as I'm laying in bed completely depressed, but I'm saying over, Rabbi Nachman says that it must be that if I struggle with depression, I have a greater ability to be happy than a person who's naturally happy. And then all of a sudden, I'm not a slave to my disease, but I have hope that not only I can move beyond it, but I could flip it. I could turn the suffering and the sadness into joy. So if you think about those things in your life that plague you, you have to know this is a very deep yesod. Because that thing itself is just a klipa. It's a shell. The reason you struggle with that thing is to throw you off. It's to scare you. It's to make you think you're never going to have it. And therefore you don't pursue it. But what if you know you're going to have it? What if you know in the end of the day, you're going to be the greatest at it? You know, Michael Jordan, Lahavdil, an NBA, is the greatest basketball player ever lived, maybe the greatest athlete who ever lived. How many schools did he try to get into before he actually went to college to play basketball for his school? He got rejected from 8 schools. And he ended up becoming the greatest basketball player in history. And there's a lot of colleges. Division III, I don't know, anything. Now, imagine he gave up. How many times have we tried something and we gave up? Why? Because one time it didn't work out, 2 times, 3 times, so now you're dreaming, you're in La La Land. But what if you know that the more that you struggle to do it, the greater the end is going to be if you don't give up? Now it changes your whole dynamic with it. You keep fighting for it, you keep fighting for it, and every single fall in it is actually going to show you that ultimately on the other side, you'll have a greater Aliyah. And that's a complete change in how you experience your life. That's a complete change in what you end up accomplishing and what you end up doing. You know, there's no way that I would be able to think to myself a few years ago as I'm sitting in the Psych Word, thinking about taking my own life because I'm so depressed and it's not ending after years, that just a few years later, I'm going to be traveling to Eastern Europe to teach people how to be happy. But this is the koach of tzaddikim, and this is the koach of the Torah. This is what's going to save the world. The vaccine is good, but the vaccine is not going to take disease away because disease is coming from a lack of joy. So we need to look down very, very deep And we need to find root causes, and we need to find root solutions. And they're spiritual. Rabbi Nachman says that when a person wants to be close to Hashem, initially when he does so, even though people will tell you when you become Baal Tshuva, once you're religious, all your problems are going to go away. Or at least that's what you think is going to happen. Often what ends up happening is things get harder. Much harder. Rabbi Nachman says, don't worry, because all of the distancing, all the times that you feel like Hashem is rejecting you, he doesn't care about you, he's not listening to you, he says all of that is for one thing, to bring you closer. And he says it over and over again. All the distancing is just to bring you closer. So you need to fight more. You need to fight harder. The story of the Baal Shem Tov. The Baal Shem Tov said, they asked him, why is it that when I try to get close to Hashem, it's like a roller coaster? Some days I feel so close to Hashem. Some days I feel like he doesn't care about me at all. Some days I don't even feel like he exists. So he gave him a story. He said one day there was a king and he invited everybody over to his home. He wanted to have a big celebration, a big party. He invites everybody in the community. They all run and flock. What happens when they get to the kingdom? What do they see? A gigantic wall. So most of the people there, they leave. Obviously, it was a joke. It was a mistake. The king doesn't really want to see me. There's a huge wall. There'll be a door or something. But some of them actually stayed and they climbed the wall. He said, maybe, he wants to put up a test for us. Start climbing the wall. They get over the wall. And what do they see when they get there? Another wall. So half of them leave. The other half, let me climb again. And this continues to whittle down, till there's one guy left. And he's trying to climb this wall and he can't. And he just leaves. All of a sudden, the king's son comes. He sees all the walls. And he says, I do not believe that my Abba doesn't want to see me. I don't believe that he put up these walls. And they vanished. And he walked in. Now, why was the son able to understand that it can't be that my father doesn't really want to see me? Because he was the only one who was the father's son. Everyone else was a guest. But the son understood that even though there's all these walls, he must still want to see me. So what's the purpose of the walls? That you can see through the illusion. There was a movie called The Matrix, when I used to watch that kind of stuff. In The Matrix, there's two worlds that are going on. One the red pill and one the blue pill. And they exist simultaneously. So too for us. A person can see that Hashem's not there in his life. And he could see that when he tries, he feels even further, or he struggles even more. And say to himself, it's obviously either Hashem's not there, he doesn't care. He doesn't want it. Or you could say, I'm his daughter. I'm his son. It can't be that you don't want to see me. And I'm not going to budge until you show me your face. I thought it was going to be easy to come to Europe, which was a mistake. Because I didn't have Israeli passport yet. And I didn't realize you need one to come in and out, since I just moved there in Aliyah. So my wife texted me and she said, David, you should make sure you don't need an Israeli passport. I already spent, all this money on the hotels and the this and the flight and whatever. So I look and apparently you do. But Israel's not like America. You can't make an appointment in 5 seconds, get like an online meeting and take care of something. You have to wait weeks or months, whatever. So I went to the place that you get the stuff and they didn't let me in. I said, speak to my wife. My wife starts to speak to them in a more harif Israeli way to get them on board. And they said, we don't speak to people on the phone. Yalla, nice to speak to you. Mapitom, nothing to do. And I'm like, I left there and I'm sitting in my car, Shemi, this filmmaker from France who emails me a year ago saying, David, I saw your classes online. Wow, they're so powerful, changing my life. I don't want to make movies anymore for secular shtusim. I want to use this ability that Hashem gave me and to shine the light of Hashem in the world. He booked everything to be with me, that we're going to meet now. We're going to do a film together, Bezrat Hashem, and to show Judaism and Jews, not in a horrible way, like they constantly keep showing us on Orthodox, that we're pariahs and we're this and we're that. Show something nice, show something good, show something light. And now I'm not gonna go. I couldn't believe it. And I had students who already bought the room, so they're on the room to be there with me, and I'm not gonna go now. Like I couldn't. I sat in my car. I start crying to Hashem. I said, Hashem, I'm not perfect. I have many, many things wrong with me. I have many mistakes and errors. There's things I could be doing better on. But I'm fighting for you every day. Fight for me. Fight for me. And I screamed and I screamed and I cried. And then I got a text from my wife. David, I just spoke to my dad. Apparently his friend works for the embassy. He called the person in the office, the mayor, and the mayor is going to make sure that you get something crazy. Something crazy. How do you get to the point that you get to experience something like that? So Rabbi Nachman says you have to fight. We don't realize, why are we called Yisrael? What does it mean to be Jewish? Yisrael means that we fought with Hashem. That's what it means. You fight with Hashem and you don't give up. That's what it means to be Jewish. And this is what we need, because the Gemara says that in the final generation, how are you going to know that Mashiach's coming? When there's a tremendous level of chutzpah in the world, especially when you see political leaders in the world, that they have no sense of what's right. They don't want to hear anybody else, that the chutzpah, the brazenness is just at an all-time level. And you see it really clearly. So in Chassidut, they teach, so what's the antidote? What's the vaccine for brazenness? How are we going to bring the Mashiach? So Rabbi Nachman says you need holy chutzpah. You need the same brazenness, but for Hashem. That you're going to fight and you're going to claw until you find Him. That you're going to do everything that you possibly can in your might not to give up on this, not to give up on your dream, not to give up on your hopes, not to give up on your life, and to go find Hashem and to fight. And that's holy chutzpah. Not with other people, with yourself. With yourself. And this itself is what's going to bring the Mashiach. This itself is going to bring the redemption. Viktor Franco was a very famous writer and psychologist. He comes from Vienna, Austria. And he was a huge psychiatrist who had a different theory about people than Freud. And at the time, Freud was like God. So everybody bowed down to him. Whatever he said was true. We're monkeys and we're this and we're that. And we're just doing things to survive. And all of our behaviors are only to survive, and that's it. So he had a theory, Viktor Frankl, that really what matters more to us is meaning. Man's search for meaning. That meaning is more primary in a person's life even than survival. His proof for this actually came when he was in the Holocaust, because he saw Jewish people there who gave up their last piece of bread to strangers so they would not die. But that doesn't make sense if everything you're doing is for survival. But that's a very meaningful act. So he came out of the Holocaust, he came out of the camps on fire, that it must be that his theory was true. But he writes in his book that when he first got there, he had written for years all of his research. He was very, very astute, very smart, very studious. He wrote down prolific notes, and he had all of them with him. So when they took him to the camps, he had all of his notes with him. They obviously took the notes from him, and he started to cry, and he said, please don't take these. You don't need them. They're not going to mean anything to you. It's going to be like gibberish for you. Please, you could take anything of mine. Don't take the notes. Obviously, he didn't know what was going on fully, and that they were going to destroy everything. So they laughed at him. They took the notes. They burned them up, destroyed them. They took away his clothes. They shaved his head, and they gave him the clothes of a person who died in the camps. That's how everybody got their clothes. The last person's outfit. Sitting there, thinking about his life. All of his external pursuits in his life just vanished, melted in front of his eyes. And that was his whole life, because as a secular person, that's all that there is. So he's sitting there in his dead man's uniform, living life now as a dead person, because everything that he built is now gone. And in despair, he puts his hands in his pockets and he finds a note. He takes out the note, he opens it up, and it said, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. And at this moment that all of his external pursuits burned away, What was given birth to was emunah, was faith. That his external dreams were crushed, but his internal dreams were fulfilled. The Zohar says that when a person is very far from Hashem, sometimes the only way to have him realize that God exists is to break down his body. Because only with the breakdown of the body can the soul start to illuminate. Similar to the way that a moth goes into the cocoon, and in the cocoon, he's literally dying. He's like 99% dead. And at the moment that he's about to go completely extinct, he becomes a butterfly. So this is us right now. We're all in the cocoon. But if we hold on a little bit longer, if we believe that everything really is for the good, even though we don't see it's for the good, that we fight for that faith, that we fight for Hashem, that we fight to experience true belief in our life, and we don't give up because it's hard, then what we're going to find is that we turn into spiritual butterflies. That not only are we not going to go back to what we were, we're not going to go back to being moths, which we're praying for, that we should just go back to how it was before life ruined us, before we got abused, before we got addicted, before we got destroyed. And Hashem has something much bigger planned for you. That the destruction itself is going to turn into you flying. Jewish people are going to fly. The world is going to fly. We're going to have an elevation in consciousness. Society is going to take huge leaps and bounds. Universal peace and love, truth and justice. I'll finish now by just telling you personally, I spoke about the Psych Word that I was in. And I've said this many times before, but I realized something remarkable when I was there. That even though when I got there, I thought the majority of people who were there were going to be very disturbed, people you never saw in society. What was it called? The something flew over as a cuckoo's nest. Yeah, one flew. I saw the nicest, smartest, most well-meaning people there. I was shocked. And the one thing that I noticed that was common about all of them, including me, was how sophisticated we were. How much that we thought we ran our lives. Rabbi Nachman says that sadness comes from excess. What type of excess? Excessive feeling that you're in control. Ani maloch, I run the world. When Hashem created the universe, he created these vessels. These vessels broke when Hashem tried to pour his light into those vessels. Why did the vessels break? Because each vessel tried to hold the light on its own. And then after Hashem fixed the vessels. How did he fix the vessels? One, because they stopped trying to hold the light on their own. They held it with the rest of the vessels. And the other is it became a brand new entity, that all of these broken vessels came together and became one beautiful vessel. And so too, I'm sitting there, I'm thinking to myself, everything that I've tried to do in my life just blown up. I'm married, and my wife hasn't really actually seen me for years now. Been sleeping in my bed, laying in my bed, crying about what a horrible person I am. My 2-year-old child, my 1-year-old daughter, they haven't seen me. My job, go to school for 6 years, all these things just blew up. And I tried so hard. It wasn't like I didn't try. I really tried, all of it. And all of it just got destroyed. And I said, what? If I'm ever going to get out of here, if I'm going to make it out, and not only make it out, but I'm going to stop surviving from second to second. I'm actually going to live. It has to be that Hashem is going to help me. That Hashem is going to make my life work. Not that I'm going to make my relationship with my wife work. Not that I'm going to be a good parent. Not that I'm going to get the job that I want. Not that I'm going to heal, but that Hashem is going to heal me. And I made a decision at that moment, like Rabbi Nachman says to do, which I was very hard-pressed to actually follow through with. Best thing that you can do in your life is talk to Hashem for an hour a day. I said, Hashem, if you're really going to help me and it's going to be you who does it, I'm going to need to talk to you a lot. I said, I promise, when I get out of here, if you let me get out of here, I'm going to start talking to you for an hour a day, and I'm giving everything to you from now on. And I did. My whole life changed. My whole life completely flipped. What was it that forced me to be able to develop faith like that comes now from Hibodedut? That many times people are doing physical things to try to take care of their problems, and I go to a field, or I go to a forest, or I go to my closet, and I just cry to Hashem until He helps me. How do you get like that? So often it's when everything breaks around you. And somehow in Hashem's kindness, if you have enough faith to get to that point, you can see that the broken vessels themselves become one whole beautiful new faith that you never had before. That the darkness in the life itself transforms to light. So Bezrat Hashem, I hope tonight's class connected to you, resonated with you on some level. Usually I ask at the end of class if anybody, the class is over, if you want to go home. I used to be with Bukhari and Sephardim, they're very respectful. So they won't leave until the rabbi leaves. And I never realized. And I would stay for like an hour after for questions. And someone came up to me like, can you just announce that the class is over? I'm announcing the class is over. But if anybody has any questions from tonight's class, some people online, sometimes they ask questions. Does anybody have any questions? And if it's in Polish, so Shami or the rabbi, I guess, can translate.
It's too bad we have a student who always asks questions, too bad she's not here.
Okay. What she have asked?
Her questions are usually very technical.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you can't reproduce it.
Each one has their own focus.
I hear you. Okay. Anybody online? You guys have any questions over here? From New York? Anywhere? Okay. All right. Everybody have an amazing, amazing day, amazing night, depending on where you are. Bezrat Hashem, tomorrow I'm going to be going with Shemi to Ukraine. We're going to go to the Kivrei of Tzaddikim. Hopefully we're going to film some beautiful stuff. And then Bezrat Hashem will be in Oman. So I hope this year is really a sweet year for all of us, that all of the maniot in our life turn into ni'imot, that all of the obstacles in our life turn into the greatest bliss. And we get to see the Geula, we get to see the Mashiach. It's going to be Shemitah year. So this is, the Midrash says that why did we get exiled to begin with? Because we didn't keep Shemitah. So hopefully the Geula is also going to come in the merit of the Shemitah. This will be the year for that. Have an amazing night. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.